Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Hi, welcome again to our ongoing discussion on drama. Remember, in the last class, we covered a rather wide ground, right? Beginning with classical Greek drama, because that's the foundation of Western drama as such. We discussed how, you find the origins of drama in the choral performances, and then with the addition of one character by Thespis, and then Aeschylus, another character, and then Sophocles, another character, and then Euripides. And in the meanwhile, they reduce the number of people in chorus, a lot of structural transformation that undergo. So we discussed all of them in Greek drama, and of course then we moved on to discuss Roman drama, and from there English morality plays, and we discussed Elizabethan drama, and very briefly we discussed drama in 17th, 18th and 19th century. Of course, not significant ones, of course not in an introductory course. Please remember, this is an introductory course. So for an introductory course, we have covered a very wide ground, or even a very long stretch of drama as such. And as I've been highlighting, the intention is not to give you an exhaustive picture of anything. On the other hand, it is to, of course, draw your attention towards these remarkable gems, and of course to pique your interest. It's like, if I can use this metaphor, just to tantalize you, with whatever is in store for you if you actually go to them. So the intention is to drive you towards those playwrights, towards those genres, towards those writers, not of course to exhaust it. Okay, yeah, with that, let's come to discuss modern drama in this class. Okay, so when we say modern drama, for the sake of convenience, we locate it in the sense of time, from in the 20th century, generally in the 20th century, drama in the 20th century, especially in the European context. Of course, next week we can take up a discussion of Indian drama in detail, but now modern drama. Okay, so here is a kind of broad timeline for 20th century drama. So whenever we discuss drama, so this timeline should definitely help you. You have the First World War. It begins in 1914. Of course, how is that important for modern drama? Of course, that's important for modern drama as much as it's important for modern poetry, modern fiction, because that plays a major role, because it changes the very nature of humanity. The World War changes the very nature of humanity. It alters societal perception towards existence and other things. Therefore, it brings about an epochal change, an epochal transition, not just in the structures of society, but also in the structures of human consciousness. That's why these world wars play an important role, especially when we are discussing 20th century literature. Okay, in 1928, just hardly less than 2 decades into that, we have Bertolt Brecht, an exemplary playwright. Beginning his he writes the Threepenny Opera, and of course that inaugurates a new school of drama called epic theater and all that. Bertolt Brecht, therefore 1928 plays an important role. From 1928, you have again 1939, beginning of the Second World War. That too is a very important one for reasons similar to the First World War, right? It brings about an epochal transitions in human society, human consciousness, and all that. Humanity's outlook towards polity, administration, culture, existence, everything changes. Okay, so it's a greatest geopolitical shift that takes place in through these wars. Then in 1950, you have Eugene Ionescu, again a very important Romanian-based Paris-settled playwright. He writes The Bard Soprano, which seems to inaugurate another new chapter in the history of drama. We are going to discuss that in a very short while, but for time being, you can call it inauguration of the theatre of the absurd. And then to strengthen that, in 1952, you have Samuel Beckett publishing Waiting for Godot, a remarkable play, And in 1957, you have Harold Pinter publishing his Birthday Party. Of course, Harold Pinter is a Nobel laureate too. And in 1961, you have Martin Esslin, a renowned journalist, a playwright, and a sort of philosopher, almost giving a namakarana for this particular theatre. He calls it officially Theatre of the Absurd. The naming ceremony happens in the 1960s. The seeds were sown sometime in the 1950s, and the naming ceremony happens in 1961 with Martin Esslin's Theatre of the Absurd. He uses the term for the first time there in a book of an eponymous title. Okay, so this is a broad outline that we can keep in mind while discussing 20th century drama. Now, we said Bertolt Brecht plays a major role because, remember, almost until the modern drama, until Bertolt Brecht, the sway and influence of Greek drama on the entire continent of Europe was almost, it was very solid. In other words, until the 20th century, the influence of Greek drama was very tight. Therefore, even during Shakespearean drama, of course, you find a lot of unity, the unity of action that we talk of, unity of time, and when it comes to the characters, protagonists being of noble birth and all that, all of them, they remain intact. Therefore, it has had a very strong influence until the beginning of the 20th century. Greek drama, the entire European drama is under the tight grips of Greek drama as such. Okay, so you find a fresh breeze in Bertolt Brecht and his experiments. For the first time, he says that the purpose of art is not exactly to mirror society, because if it's just a reflection of society that we find in literature, why should we read literature at all? We can just watch society. Therefore, he believed that, especially his theatre, his drama, he believed that, more than reflecting the reality, what you need is a hammer with which you can shape reality, So he considered literature, especially drama and theatre, as, shaping agents, are agents that bring in transformation into the structures of society. Okay, and he calls that epic theatre, a well-known German playwright, and of course his influence on European theatre, especially in the 1920s or 30s, is something significant, epic theatre. Now, his plays, celebrate anarchic, nihilistic, anti-bourgeois sentiment. So to a certain extent, you can find influence of, Marxism in his plays. But more than that, his plays display a grand disillusion with a grand narrative called humanity and its positive ending and all that. Remember, we have already witnessed the First World War, and we have seen how the world has been, put in a great disarray, and how nihilism has crept in, how the world has been thrown into the grips of anarchy and all that, right? So his plays explore all that, both structurally and thematically. Therefore, you can say that his aesthetic productions were shaped to a large extent by his political principles, his political ideologies, right? That's the reason why he said that his theatre, his plays, his drama is meant not so much to reflect society, but to change society from within. That's why he begins using drama as an agent to bring about structural transformations in society. The Three-Penny Opera, Life of Galileo, very, very important work. In fact, it's through that particular work that we come to know the travails of Galileo, and how an individual, again, an individual is pitted against society. Remember, Galileo, a major, philosopher and scientist, who held a radically different opinion about the nature of the universe, about the nature of the planet, about the nature of the solar system, about the entire cosmic existence, and how that, radically upset the church and its doctrine. As a result of that, though truth was on his side, he had to undergo a lot of pain, trauma, and eventually even death, right? So the travails, the struggles of an individual pitted against society is beautifully explored in Life of Galileo, right? You have Mother Courage and the Children. Today, Bertolt Brecht's name is almost synonymous with Mother Courage, a very well played, it's one of the most, performed plays, you can call it. And you also have an experimental play, The Caucasian Chalk Circle. These are some of his well-known works. Bertolt Brecht, Epic Theatre, okay? And he introduces a lot of radical concepts. One is defamiliarization. We have identified defamiliarization as a technique of alienation, wherein he believes that, the purpose of art should be to defamiliarize, not to make the audience familiarize with what is happening on the stage, but of course to bring them, to bring a certain distance between art and society, so that the audience can look at society from a fresh perspective. Once when you introduce the gap, that's why he did not encourage, until his Epic Theatre, almost all theatres encouraged audience identifying themselves with the actors and the characters that they were performing on stage. Empathy, oneness with the characters. So for the first time, Bertolt Brecht revolted against that kind of empathy. He said, I don't want the audience to be moved by the flow of emotions that are being performed on stage. I want them to distance themselves. They have to keep their logical apparatus intact in order to assess what is happening here. Therefore, whenever he felt that the audience is about to be moved by the pathos of the play, he introduced some funny element. Of course, later we can discuss, there's a particular term he uses for that, okay? So he wanted to create that kind of a distance between his audience and this, okay, defamiliarization. And then meta theater. Well, what is meta theater? Of course, we have discussed this as a fictional technique, breaking the fourth wall. You have, the genesis of that concept can be found in Epic Theatre. Well, for the first time, he wants his audience not just to be passive seekers of what is being performed there, but an active interpreter. He wants his audience to be active interpreters, right? Therefore, many times you find actors or characters performing on the stage directly addressing the audience. Audience is called the fourth wall, and when you break that, when you make a character speak directly with the audience, it's called breaking the fourth wall. That's the concept of meta theater. So he introduces that particular technique so that he wants the audience to retain the critical ability to analyze logically, and rationally critique what is happening on stage. So this is, as part of that, he introduces alienation effect, meta theater, and of course justice. That's the theater technique. I said, it's so what does he do? So he combines, justice is a beautiful a portmanteau term, in German. So it means clubbing just the essence of it with gesture. So it's a kind of a performance technique. We discussed several performance techniques, right, in one of the previous classes. Please recall that justice is one such technique where through a certain physical action on stage, the attitude of the character is revealed. Usually, action on stage does not reveal the attitude of the character as much as plots and story. But here, this physical movement of the actor can bring out the attitude of the character that he is performing, the role that he or she is performing, they are performing. so jesters. And historicization, that's again his political belief and philosophical belief. What does he believe in? Usually, what does literature do? Literature says that, it tends to universalize everything, human nature as a universal and unchanging component. But Brecht believed that human nature is basically a product of a particular historical situation. So, if the conditions, the historical conditions that produce reality change, then automatically human nature also changes. Right now, imagine what is the historical situation that we are talking of, the First World War, and he saw firsthand the transformations in the structure of consciousness, human consciousness. Therefore, he believed that human nature is by and large determined by the contours of history. Okay, that's historicization. These are some remarkable contributions of Brecht to drama. From Brecht, let's go to theatre of cruelty, another significant concept introduced in 1938. Of course, the thick shades of Second World War are already there. They're looming large, right? We discussed the timeline. And Antonin Artaud, in his book, The Theatre and Its Double, of course, it's its English translation, introduced the concept theatre of cruelty for the first time. Of course, here radically transforms or redefines the very notion of theatre. Theatre is not what is being performed, not just a performative component like we understand theatre in its traditional sense. For him, theatre meant practice, a practice where the purpose of this practice was to awaken human beings, human consciousness, and the way they feel, the way they react and all that. So therefore, it's a theatre is a space of practice, more than a space of performance. Theatre offers a scope or a space for practice to bring in a changed consciousness, consciousness raising activity, something like this. Okay, and by cruelty, because usually cruelty again has a very negative shade of meaning, right? For him, cruelty is not something like, to cause pain or some kind of sadistic or masochistic element. No, nothing like that. On the other hand, he meant by cruelty a violent shaking up, a physical determination to shatter a false reality or to thrust open the false hopes in which humanity seeks its shelter, so that they awaken to the new reality. The the violence refers to, the force with which you make the audience get up. You make this audience sit up and understand the radical shifts that are happening in society. That is meant by theatre of cruelty. Therefore, when somebody asked him what is the purpose of Artaud, of this theatre of cruelty, Artaud said that my theatre is meant to disturb the spectator, not to make them complacent, but to disturb them profoundly, to such an extent that my performances or even my plays should pierce the heart and soul in such a way as to free the unconscious repressions. The unconscious repressions that are there, when we say unconscious repressions, society will have played a major role. Family, society, and historical forces will have played a major role in the unconscious repressions of an individual. So therefore, he wants to unleash that. That's the purpose. So in order to achieve that, he believed that more than dialogue, the spectacle was very, very important. Therefore, he exploits using techniques of mimes, gestures, and implicit meanings so as to create a very bright and vibrant visual spectacle. He tried to achieve the purpose. This is, in a nutshell, theatre of cruelty for us. Okay. Yeah. From here we go to theatre of the absurd. In fact, theatre of the absurd, it held its influence almost throughout Europe and even into India until, let's say, the late 60s. From 30s to 60s, for about 3 to 4 decades approximately. It was like a kind of a cannibal variety of drama, because in the in the glory of this particular type of drama, other types of drama almost, they vanished out of sight, something like that. Therefore, theatre of the absurd, a canonical type of drama. What do you mean by absurd theatre or theatre of the absurd? Again, it's a phrase coined by Martin Esslin, a philosopher, a minor playwright, more than that, a journalist. Okay, Martin Esslin coins this term in order to describe the plays written by iconoclastic writers such as Samuel Beckett, Eugene Ionesco, Jean Genet, Harold Pinter, Tom Stoppard, and Edward Albee and others. He describes their plays as absurd theatre. This absurd theatre was hugely influenced by the philosophy of Soren Kierkegaard and Sartre and other, even philosophy of, Heidegger, Nietzsche more than others. Existentialism played a role in shaping the broad contours of absurd theatre. Therefore, you find existentialism creating the silhouette of absurd theatre, right? And remember, what is existential philosophy as such? In order to understand absurd theatre, we need to know existential philosophy, because it's the philosophical tenet of existentialism that shapes absurd theatre. That's the reason why we need to know existential philosophy. Existential philosophy believes that, behind the creation of human beings, there is no apparent purpose. Now, in order to better understand this, now look at this. Behind the creation of a chair, an object, there is a purpose. When a carpenter creates a chair, or when the first carpenter created the first prototype of chair, there must have been a clear purpose in their head, right? It is meant to sit. Therefore, a chair is created later. So many designs come, but ultimately, behind the creation of a chair, there is a purpose. Behind the creation of a table too, there is a purpose. So there is a purpose behind the creation of everything in this universe except the creation of human beings. Therefore, they believe that human beings have been thrown onto the stage and they don't know what their purpose is. That's why we feel an existential void, boredom and all that. So in order to overcome that tragedy, because by birth it's like tragic. Human life by birth is tragic because we don't know what our purpose is existentially. Of course, when you say purpose, we are not talking in terms of a materialistic purpose. I want to become a doctor, engineer, scientist. Not in that sense. What is the existential purpose? What is the philosophical purpose behind the creation of human beings here, right? What is the existential purpose? So therefore, in order to fend off, that's why they said that, the entire human journey is, from the journey from cradle to grave, is a journey of a being from being to becoming. Our existential journey is a journey of from being to becoming something. So each of us has to find the purpose on our own, and that's a very a futile task. At the end of the day, it becomes a futile task, right? And remember, we have had several world wars here that have almost destabilized the world order, that have destabilized the grand notion of, God, that have almost, you find many philosophers, great novelists declaring the death of God. Death of God. Remember, because if God were to exist, would we have world wars? Would we have these kind of pandemics? What is the purpose? Is there any purpose at all behind any of them? Or are they just, chance factors? So all of them are in the backdrop of that. Therefore, their plays explore it, theatre of the absurd. So in the backdrop of this, we find the entire life, futile, useless, purposeless. So that's why their plays explore it. Their dramatic productions explore it. We have already identified Martin Esslin as the person to have given the nomenclature, the theatre of the absurd. Of course, before this nomenclature was given in the 1960s, already Beckett, Ionesco, Adamov, Genet, Albee were writing very well, and their plays explored these concepts. Only the naming happened in the 60s, that's all, And now it's not a, this group was a motley crowd. They were living in exile in Paris. So Paris provided all these radical writers a fertile home. That's why you have Beckett. He was a French, basically he hailed from Ireland, settled in, France. Similarly, you have Eugene Ionesco from Romania, settled in, Paris. You have Adamov from Russia, settled in there. So all of them, so it becomes a ground. Paris provides all of them an extraordinary ground. So they did not write in conjunction with each other. Their plays explored this absurd condition. That's why you club them together and call them, absurd playwrights. And say, for instance, some of well-known features of absurdism are, they believe that the world lacks meaning. The world lacks meaning and all that. That's why, of course, we have discussed the post-war Europe, how it has to be reborn out of the ashes and things like that. And they also did not believe that, language, they did not believe in the efficacy of language as an effective mode of communication, because if language were to be an effective mode of communication, then wouldn't we avoid great catastrophes that befell the entire planet, especially something like World War? So that means the very purpose of language as a mode of achieving communication between two societies or two individuals, it's failed. Right? So against the backdrop of all that, they begin writing this, writing these kind of plays. And therefore, their plays, the component of absurd theatre, as a result, they float all the norms of traditional Greek drama. So in the traditional Greek drama, let's say, for instance, you have a beautiful beginning, a rising middle, and a very convincing ending. So if you pick up any absurd drama, the play begins in a very absurd way and in the middle of something. It begins in the middle of something. Say, for instance, Samuel Beckett's Waiting for Godot. It begins in the middle of, almost a godforsaken place. Waiting for Godot. Again, probably pun is intended on Godot. Okay. And it begins on a stage when the play happens. There are two characters sitting and they've been speaking randomly, and of course irrationally, and they're waiting by a roadside. Maybe there is just a tree. They don't know why they're waiting. All that they can vaguely recall is they're waiting for a person called Godot. They don't know anything about him. They don't even know whether it's a person, whether it's a man, a woman, or a thing, or a god. They don't know anything about it. They don't know when this person would come, and they don't know why they are actually waiting, why they need to meet him, but they're simply waiting. Now, doesn't it look absurd, right? Doesn't it look irrational? Something like this. It begins on the road conversation, something like this. And you have, there is another, especially Eugene Ionesco's play, of course, where it begins with two families talking randomly, incoherent things. There are, when the play begins, you have, let's say, Smiths and you have Martins. And they speak quite randomly. There is no, what this guy says, this guy reacts in some other way, and what this guy says, this guy reacts in a random way. You and I may not even be able to watch this play if we don't understand the conditions under which it was produced, right? It's incoherent, illogical. It flies in the face of reason. The entire play flies in the face of reason. That's why when they were first produced, including Harold Pinter's Birthday Party, it did not even survive a theatrical performance of, beyond 6 to 8 shows. That means less than a week. It was only later, probably decades later, that Harold Pinter was considered a genius, and even later, Nobel Committee also honored him with the greatest prize. But during its initial stage, all that it had was just 1 week performance. That's all. It was almost shunted out of the theatre in which it was performed, because audience could not identify what was happening here. So was the case with Samuel Beckett's Waiting for Godot, but comparatively it was better, because gradually the audience began, because there was so much of, in Harold Pinter, more than dialogue, pauses play a very, very important role, whereas in Samuel Beckett, dialogues play an important role. Therefore, the saving grace in Beckett was, the dialogues. Therefore, they began picking up flavor of absurdism through the dialogues. So, how do they float? There are unconventional narrative structures. So, it does not have, in a conventional one, you have an introduction, rising action. Here, there is nothing like that. The play begins with two guys, interacting, talking, and ends with that, and there is no meaning. It does not even the dialogue does not lead them anywhere. In fact, it's even cyclical. It's not even linear, non-linear narrative, cyclical approach. As I said, when the play begins, it begins with almost two tramps. Let's say, for instance, two tramps and discussing something about waiting for this guy. They don't know the reason, they don't know when this guy would come, but they're eternally waiting, and when the play ends, they're still waiting. And by the time the play ends, in fact, it's just probably two acts, just two acts, and one of the characters even forgets, who he is waiting for and why they have come here, and he has even forgotten how they have come here. A loss of communication, a loss of, even any meaningful approach towards life. Because how do we construct life out of the ashes that the entire human society has been reduced because of the world wars? How do we construct meaning? The entire life has lost meaning, right? That's why these plays are born out of void. And how do they fill the void? By addressing the void in its entirety. So therefore, there is no clear-cut character, there is no clear-cut plot, there is no clear-cut story, there is no clear-cut dialogue. That's why you find absurd drama, many critics calling absurd drama an anti-drama. It's not even drama at all, because there is no dramatic. See, a drama is a drama because of certain dramatic elements, right? These elements constitute drama. So when those elements are missing, how can you call it drama? Therefore, it can be called an anti-drama, right? So something like this. Extraordinary experimentations. That's why if you are interested in this, please pick up any play by Samuel Beckett, especially his play Waiting for Godot. Or you have Eugene Ionesco, you have Harold Pinter, Edward Albee. All of them are remarkable playwrights. So this particular drama held its way for almost 3 to 4 decades, though other forms of drama were performed here and there. Of course, they did not gain much prominence because of the kind of the brightness that absurd drama exhibited from almost 1950s to, let's say, 70s, or you find the seeds of that in 1940s until, let's say, late 60s or 70s, something like this. Okay. Again, I hope you really enjoyed this lecture as well. For a detailed understanding of this, you will have to go in. Please remember, these classes are not substitutes for you to reading them originally, because nothing can take away the beauty, elegance, and the first-handed nature of knowledge accumulation and wisdom gathering than going into the plays. You need to go into the plays and experience what they are saying. Again, time and again, at the cost of sounding repeating, at the cost of repeating, let me say this, that the purpose is definitely to help you to move towards these original plays, to draw your attention towards the extraordinary elegance and beauty of all these writers, so that you can go there and explore whatever you like. Okay. All right. So probably in the next class, let's come and discuss one of the modern plays, or one of the plays, so that we can see what all these components of drama that we have learned, how we can see here and all that. Okay. Until then, enjoy. We'll see you in the next class with a play. Okay. Thank you.